Hello and welcome to this video tutorial. This video is a getting started with Substance Painter. So if you are completely new to Substance Painter and you just want to get to know about the user interface and how the tools work, this is the tutorial for you. If you want a more in-depth explanation of some of the tools and how they can be used, then you can look at some of my other tutorials, which I'll also link in the description and at the end of this video. So with that being said, if, like I said, you are completely new to this or you already have experience with 3D and you just want to know where the tools are and how to get started, this is for you. So let's begin. First thing we need to do is we need to go to File, New, and from here we can create a new project. Now in the new project, we can choose the template which we would like to export to. So in my particular case, this is set to Unreal Engine 4. However, you may have some sort of other workflow in which you'd like to export to. And if that is listed in here, you should go ahead and select it. Now below that, we have the import settings and we have two options here. One is to create texture per UDSM file, okay, so basically meaning creating a type of texture set, and the other one is importing a camera. So if you have a camera from another application, that can also be imported here. Below that we have the project settings, allowing us to change the resolution of our document. I'm going to set this to 4096. You can also choose the normal map format, whether or not it's going to be displayed using DirectX or OpenGL. Below that we have the compute tangent space per fragment. Okay, usually I just leave this checked. And the last section below that is where you're going to import any custom textures. For example, if you have a normal map or something along those lines that you'd also like to bring into Substance to continue to paint on. As I don't, I'm going to leave that blank and press this button right here that says select. And it's going to allow me to import a model. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to be importing the mannequin from the Unreal Engine project files. So let's choose open. And I can choose OK. Once it's done that, you can see that it has imported the mesh. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about are how we can move around our viewport. So holding down the Alt key, we can left click to rotate our model. Also holding the Alt key and right clicking, we can zoom into the model. And finally, also holding the Alt key and middle mouse button clicking will allow us to pan. Now, if we hold down the Shift key, okay, so hold down the Shift and we right click, you can see that we can change the location of the light. So this is great if you have materials on here and you want to check what it looks like under different lighting conditions. And so that's essentially it for our movement of our model. Now, let's move on to the tools over here. So the first one is the paint tool. So let's zoom into our character. And clicking on the paint tool is going to allow us to directly paint onto our model. Now, each tool has settings here along the top, and most of them are going to stay the same except for one or two here. But for the paint tool, eraser tool, projection, and so on, you can see that they essentially have the same options up here. They have the size, flow, they have the opacity, and spacing. Now those options can also be accessed by right-clicking on inside any of this blank space or on the model, and you can get access to the size of the brush, for example. You can get access to many different settings, such as the flow, the opacity, and spacing. Now the tool below that is the erase tool, so we want to erase something that we've painted, no problem. The tool below that is the projection tool. Here, this is going to allow us to project a texture onto our model. So with this one open, we go over to the right-hand side, and under the base color, we can click, and then we can choose a texture. Now we can either choose a texture that we've imported, or we can use one that's already built in to the application here. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to choose one that's already built into the application. And then you can see that we have this square. Now, if I left click, I can start to paint that texture in here. Now, if I want to change the texture, what I need to do is I need to press S. So just imagine this S for scale. Now, if I right click, I can change the size of this. If I left click, I can rotate this. If I hold down the Shift key as I do so, if I just undo this, press the Shift key as I do so, I can snap it into increments. So remember, S plus Shift will allow me to snap. So here we can paint, and we see we have this on here. Again, we can erase this if we want, no problem. So let's lay down some paint again, something like this. Okay, now the next tool, if we look at it, is the smudge tool. This is going to allow us to smudge our paint. So if we paint perhaps maybe something in white, and then we want to change the color, so we can go over here to the paint tool, and perhaps we choose red, right? We have a red color over here, and then maybe some blue or purple or something like this. We can use a smudge tool and we can smudge between the two. Okay, next tool is the stamping tool. And so basically what we need to do in order to have this, to make this work, is we find the area in which we want to clone from. We then press the V key, and it's going to create this box when we left click, and then we can move outside of that area. You can see the box will remain at the same location, and we can just paint. Okay, let's go back to the paintbrush tool. So that's the very basics here for these tools. That's all I'm going to cover over here. Now let's move on to the layers. And so if we look over here, we have layers and we have one single layer. So I'm going to delete this, press the delete key, and we're back to having no color on our model. Now, first thing you may want to do is you may want to lay down a base material. In order to do that, at the bottom, we can see the list of all the materials that we have access to. And so we can left click and drag this on. When we do that, you can see it creates a new layer. Okay, this layer is a particular layer that's related to this material, and it has access to its parameters. For example, we want to change its roughness, specular, roughness, specular, and so on and so forth. We can do that over here. Now we're not just limited to having one material. We could have two materials, for example. We could put this on top of that, and now we can see we have one material on top of the other. So when it comes to painting, we could, for example, right click on this, choose to add a mask, and then we can start to paint away and see whatever it is below it. Okay, so we can see the black below it. We could also reverse this, okay, and right click and then remove the mask. And then we can add that mask over here. Might make a little more sense, right, to have the chrome exposed below, and you can just start to paint away. Okay, so that's something you can do. Okay, so here, like I said, is the materials. You can click and drag this onto your model. Now, we also have access to our textures. So for example, if we import textures or alphas and brushes, we can also access them here. So accessing them is pretty easy. Now, in order to import a texture into here, we go to File, Import Resources, and then you would choose Add Resource. And so for example, I'm just going to choose a simple resource here. I'm going to choose maybe perhaps this one. And then here we can choose what it is. Is it an alpha? Is it color? Is it texture? What is it? Okay. So if I choose alpha and press into current project, which means that it's going to be into the project that we're currently creating, that means that when it is closed, when we close the application, it will disappear. If we choose the shelf over here, it will permanently import into the application. So I'm just going to choose current and press import. All right, and here you can see my leaf. All right, so going by the same logic as before, we could then go to project, and let's click over here, and let's choose, oops, let's go back over here, and actually let's create a new paint layer. So let's create a new layer, and we choose project. Where is it? Over here. And just as we did before, we can scroll down and I can click and drag my leaf over here. And as you can see, I can now move this into position and paint this in. Okay. Now you can see that there's an issue because I have this set to mirror, but if I paint on the side, you can see what's going on. Okay, anyway, so let's not get too caught up with that. Let's move on. So let's have a look at the materials specifically. Sorry, not the materials, the layers. So let's delete all the layers. Now we have really two types of key layers. We have a fill layer, and that's this paint box right here. If we click on this, it's going to fill our mesh with a particular color. So we can perhaps choose red, or maybe perhaps some type of gold type color. Like this. And so you see it's basically filled the model with that color. And we can also choose to have height information. If we want to paint height, we can choose the roughness of this. We can choose the metallicness of this. And so if we want to create maybe some sort of basic gold material, we can do that like so. Now, it's worth noting that if you want to paint onto a fill layer, you can't. Okay, you see over here, you cannot access those paint tools. In order to paint on here, we really have basically two options. So option number one is if you want to paint directly on the fill layer itself, you need to right click and you need to choose this option here that says add paint. When we do that, we're then able to paint on top of this. Okay. Now the issue with this is that this is directly on this layer, and we may want to work in a non-destructive workflow. That is to say, we want to be able to enable or disable certain layers and certain colors and patterns and so on and so forth. So another way we can paint on top of this is we can simply add a new paint layer, okay, a new fill layer, and we could fill this with a color, perhaps that purple we were just using, something like this. I don't know. And then we can right click and we can choose add a mask, either a white mask or a black mask, either is okay. Let's see, add white mask. Make sure we're in the paintbrush tool. And we can start to paint and remove that section below. Okay, so we can start to see what's below here. And this is great because the icon over here is going to allow us to enable or disable this. And that's something we're not going to get if we're painting directly onto here. Okay. Now, as we're painting, you can see that I'm painting the gold back in. And if I wanted to, I could right click and choose this option right here, the second one, and I can choose an alpha. So if I have, maybe I want to paint scratches in here, so I can type in scratch. Something like this, and I can start to paint these scratches on here. But you can see it's currently not doing as expected, and the reason for that is most likely the spacing. You can see, there we go. But yeah, so you can choose some sort of alpha in here. Maybe this one's a little better with a softer outline. And you can see we can start to paint, if we look very closely, these sort of gold scratches in. So that's the way we would do something like this. Now, the other type of layer is just a regular layer. If I click on this, we're going to be able to just directly paint on this and have access to all of the tools which we just did when adding the paint layer. Adding the paint to the fill layer. And again, we can enable and disable this. Now, in here, we can also choose, for example, what it is we want to paint. So if I undo this, maybe I only want to paint color. So I can just disable all these, and I can only paint color. Maybe I only want to paint height, right? So I choose height, decrease the height. Okay, so I can do that over here. So this is not enabled, sorry. So let's try it again. So maybe we only want to paint color. You see I can only paint color. And you see something interesting here. You will see that there's a difference between the two colors. And the reason for that is because we're not painting with any roughness. And we're not painting with any metallic, right? So if we start painting with metallic, and roughness enable, we're going to get the same color. Now we can also paint with height. So for example, say we want to erase this. So let's erase all of this. And now we only want to paint height information. So we go back to our brush Here we can set this to a negative or positive value. So maybe we want this to go in. And then we can change the brush size. And we can just start to paint inwards. Now you can see that it's set to this black. This is usually not good. Well, it's not really black, but that's the color that it appears. But say, for example, we just want that purple color to appear. We can start to paint in that. Like so. So I don't know, maybe we paint some eyes or something on here. Okay, so we can do something like this. So this is a great way, for example, you're just using the regular layer if we just want to have height information on one and then color on another and so on. So that's essentially it for the layers. There are a bunch of other things we can do. We can organize them into folders and we can delete them. So for example, if we want to delete this, we can do that. If we want to put this into a folder, we can create folders. Okay, let's undo that. So to create a folder, we give this a name, call this maybe gold. And then we can click and drag this in here. Oops, let's make sure we do that again. There we go. So now it's inside here. So if we disable this, you can see that the gold has disappeared. So if we organize things into folders, it's pretty easy to enable and disable them. So I'm going to drag the gold back out. Let's drag this back out and I'm going to delete this. And there we have it. Now we can also, if we want to have, we can also have masks. Okay, so we've talked about masks a minute ago. So we can right click and we can add a mask and it starts to paint them away like this. So this is using the mask that we just used just a moment ago. All right, so let's try something else. Let's go back to our brushes. So we want to select a particular brush. I'll set the default one right over here. There we go. This is not default. This one. Where is it? Oh, here we go. So you see that we can do this. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is we can also, on the masks, right click and we can, for example, not right click, we can choose to add effects. So say we want to add a generator. So we choose add generator and we see we can choose whatever it is we want to apply to this. Okay. And they're going to have a bunch of settings over here. Now, here you can see using these generators, I can get different effects and different patterns. And that's something we can also do. All right. Now, also, let's have a look at some of the settings here at the bottom. So let's remove this and let's go back to our gold. So we've looked at how we can change the perhaps roughness and specular of all these, but also we can add maps in here. So say we would choose roughness and we typed in grunge. We can also add grunge to this to make it look as if it's more worn and more used, okay? And so this is maybe another reason to why you may just want to add maybe roughness on another layer, and then you can start to edit and remove them out to get better effects. So yeah, so we can add maps inside these things and we can start to play around with some of these settings, to get, different contrasts for example. So we could do this for roughness and then the metallic, maybe we could do something else. Okay, so it's really up to you. All right. So with that being said, we have one more area to cover, and that is going to be the rendering. In order to get to the rendering tab, what we need to do is we need to go over to the top over here, and we want to choose this one right here where it says mode, and we can choose rendering mode. And then here we have an interactive renderer, and we can start to make renders of our image. All right. Now inside the rendering, we can do a bunch of things. For example, we can change environment exposures. We can change the rotation of the environments. We can even change the environment itself. Maybe we wanted something different like this. Decrease the exposure. Okay, so we can change the location of where this appears. Maybe a studio setup. Okay, so this is really going to be your choice. Let's try something like this. There we go. And we can increase the exposure a little. And we can still use the keys that we were talking about before when I said you can move the location of this around. Okay. And then over here we have some other options. For example, field of view, depth of field. So maybe you want to add some depth of field and the camera angles and stuff like that. All right. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm just going to show you how to quickly access them. Now, we also have this button right here, which is going to, if you click on it, it's going to tell you, oh, okay, the status of your render is done. If you want to increase the time so you get a better render, you need to increase the time in seconds. So here you see set to 10 seconds. Perhaps you set this to minutes, and you set this to perhaps 1 minute. And after 1 minute, oh, not 70, 1 minute, you'll get a better render. And once you're done, you can press this option here that says save. And once you do that, you'll be able to save this image. So let's just wait just for a moment for this to complete. All right, so it's completed. Then you can press the button here that says save, and then you can save this to your desktop. So with that being said, that is a brief introduction to Substance Painter and all of the different tools and how to use them very quickly. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you like it, please remember to subscribe and hit the like button. If you have any specific tutorials that you would like to see, either relating to Painter or 3ds Max or some other application, please let me know also in the comments below. Until then, thank you for watching and bye bye.